Hey, welcome to our Wednesday weekly devotional. We drop a new devotional every Wednesday at about 7 a.m. And so we're so thankful that you joined us today for what's probably going to be our last lesson on the life of David, because things start to take a turn for David at this point. And so today we're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 5. And in 2 Samuel chapter 5, David has now become king. He made a covenant for the Lord with the elders of Israel. He was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years in all. So that means he's about 70 when he passes away. So David has a long life and a long reign. There's probably something symbolic about the number 40 in his reign. I don't profess to know all the details about that. The only reason I bring that up is because the number 40 appears a lot. 40 days of wandering for Jesus, 40 days of temptation for Jesus, 40 years of wandering in the desert for the Israelites. David reigns 40 years. A lot of things happen in the 40th year or something. And so that seems to be a significant thing. But I don't know that you and I are ever really going to know what that significance truly is this side of heaven. Having said that, simply here in the text today, it just means that David reigned for 40 years. It was a long reign. It was a couple of generations. And so people would have grown up with David as king. Their children would have grown up with David as king. And so it was a long and prosperous time in the nation of Israel. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the character of David that we've looked at to this date is that he sought the Lord on his decisions, that he tried to follow God the best that he could. And so we see that in the first few verses here in chapter 5 of 2 Samuel, and then specifically starting in 2 Samuel chapter 5 in verse 6, it actually says this in the New Living Translation. Then David led his men to Jerusalem to fight against the Jebusites, which were the original inhabitants of the land who were living there. The Jebusites taunted David, saying, "You'll never get in here. Even the blind and the lame could keep you out," for the Jebusites thought they were safe. But David captured the fortress of Zion, which is now called the City of David. On that day, David said to his troops, "I hate those lame and blind Jebusites. Whoever attacks them should strike by going into the city through the water tunnel." That's the origin of the saying, the blind and the lame may not enter the house. Verse 9, so David made the fortress his home, and he called it the City of David, and he extended the city, starting at the supporting terraces and working inward. And David became more powerful because he was such a wonderful person and everybody loved him. No. And David became more powerful because he was really strong and worked really hard and pulled him. No. Not any of those reasons. Verse 10 tells us, and David became more and more powerful because the Lord God of heaven's armies was with him. And that's really the first thing that we want to look at today, is that the main reason for seeing prosperity in the life of David is because the Lord was with him. Why was the Lord with him? Well, because David ran towards God. He lived his life seeking God, trying to make the best decisions based on the instructions that God had laid out to this point in the Torah, and then seeking what the prophet said and trying to give attention as best he could to those things. Because of that, the Lord was with him, and that's why David prospered, became more powerful. So you and I can take that lesson, and you and I can live in a way that we put the Lord first in our life, and we give the Lord credit for wherever we prosper. Maybe it's in a career. Things go well, we get promoted. Make sure that you give the Lord credit for that. Maybe it's in your family. Maybe you have just a big family who makes great decisions and continually just builds and is a respectable family, and love each other well and all of that. And so you can give credit to the Lord for your amazing family. Maybe the Lord has blessed you with material wealth, whatever that may be. And so you can give the Lord credit for those things as well. And when we do that, we take that life that has been spent focused on following the Lord, and we use the very blessings that God gives to us, we give back to him, and God can give us more with that. It's that idea of having an open hand with what God has blessed us with, being willing to share it, being willing to give that credit to the Lord and others as well. That's another point. So that's the good news about David in this text. And then we kind of pivot. And the word then actually happens in verse 11. Verse 11 says, "Then the king of Hiram and Tyre sent messengers to David, along with the cedar and timber and carpenters and stonemasons. And they built David a palace. And David realized that the Lord had confirmed him as king over Israel and had blessed his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. So far, so good. After moving from Hebron to Jerusalem, David married more concubines and wives, and they had more sons and daughters. These are the names of David's sons who were born in Jerusalem: Shemua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphelet." Great names. Name your kid these things. I'm really just kidding. These are difficult names to say. Made me stumble. The point that we wanted to see is really in verse 13. After moving from Hebron to Jerusalem, David married more concubines and wives. And that may not seem to carry that much significance on the face value. We may just kind of ascribe that to a cultural norm at the time. And there is a little bit of that going on here. But I wanted to point out that in Deuteronomy 17, the people are given guidelines for a king. So this is instructions that have happened before the time of David, a few hundred years before that time. And it says this: "You're about to enter the land your God is giving to you. When you take it over and settle there, you may think we should select a king to rule over us like the other nations around us. If this happens, be sure to select a king, as king, the man the Lord your God chooses. You must appoint a fellow Israelite. He may not be a foreigner." So far, so good. Verse 16, "The king must not build up a large stable of horses for himself or send his people to Egypt to buy horses, for the Lord has told you, you must never return to Egypt." So far, so good. Although I should caution you, Solomon gets in trouble here. Okay, back to verse 17 in Deuteronomy 17. So Deuteronomy 17:17, "The king must not take many wives for himself, because they will turn his heart away from the Lord. And he must not accumulate large amounts of wealth and silver and gold for himself." And so when we read that David married more concubines and wives, I think the narrator here in 2 Samuel puts that in on purpose for you and I to catch. And remember the words in Deuteronomy that the king of Israel is not supposed to amass wives and wealth. And David has begun to do that. And so while I could say, yes, literally, you shouldn't marry more than one person, I think that's true. I think the idea and the narrative here is that we need to remain faithful to the prior instruction that the Lord has given us. And so you and I, no matter how important we are, even if we are confirmed as the king over Israel, as David felt like he had been, that doesn't give us license to disobey the instructions of the Lord. Knowing the full picture, we know that David did have a downfall, and that was women. He looked at Bathsheba lustfully, committed adultery with her, had her husband killed. It does seem odd that this is a guy who started off so well. So many good things even happen after this point that we're reading today in the narrative. But this is kind of the beginning point where we start seeing David make some questionable decisions. So I want to use that as a warning point for us that no matter where we are, and I'll be honest, pride is a tricky thing for me. We need to be careful to remember that we are not above God's instructions. We're not special enough to where that applies to other people, but not to us. And so we need to do what we've been doing, and that's following the instructions of the Lord. Keep focused on those things instead of focused on amassing material blessing here on earth. So I hope that's helpful for you today. I think that those are two principles that you and I can follow this week. And so I hope that you'll do that. And I hope that I'll hear from you, whether that's at the information desk on a Sunday. Remember, we have worship at 8:30, 9:45, or 11 a.m. The information desk is usually where I am, and so I'd love to meet you there. The other way you can get in touch with me is through email, jallison@greenwoodbc.com, where you can get in touch with me through social media. We'd love to connect with you, pray for you, and help you grow in your faith. Y'all have a wonderful week. We'll see you next time.